Hi there, everybody, and welcome to Hi There with Rabbi Leah. It's so good to see all of you. Happy Tuesday morning. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. And boy, it's been pretty hot out, huh? So hopefully you're sitting in the comfort of your apartment in the nice, cool air conditioning, and you will enjoy this program. Last week, actually a couple of weeks ago, I started preparing us for the High Holy Days. And a couple of weeks ago, I spent some time talking about slichot, what slichot is all about, some of the prayers that we say, some of the beautiful piyutim, the poems that we say, and so on. And believe it or not, slichot is now less than 3 weeks away. The evening of Saturday, September 12th. But you'll hear more about that. And then last week, I spoke to you about the shofar service and the fact that we were about to begin blowing the shofar because the tradition is to blow shofar on a variety of times, which I'm going to go into a little bit in a moment, but certainly on Rosh Hashanah morning and then at the end of Yom Kippur, and also during some of the services on Rosh Hashanah. So, although I'm going to talk about the shofar itself, the different blasts, and so on, I'm kind of preparing you in advance that this Rosh Hashanah, because it falls on a Shabbat morning, there is no blowing of the shofar. And that is a very ancient mandate, and I'll explain why in a moment, but you'll be able to hear it plenty of times and fulfill the mitzvah of hearing the shofar. I blew it last week on Friday when I was on campus. I went to outside of all the different buildings and blew the shofar. And I'll be doing that every morning that I'm on campus between now and Rosh Hashanah. It is the tradition to blow it every weekday morning at the end of a weekday morning service, except on Shabbat. So last week, I spoke about the three different parts of the shofar service. The Malchiot, which is the first part of the shofar service, which talks about God's kingship or sovereignty, if we don't want to use a masculine term for it, because certainly people see the divine, the sovereign, the spirit, by a variety of different names and a variety of different descriptions, and some people by no physical description at all. So Malchio talks about the sovereignty of God as a ruler, and a ruler in modern parlance would be someone who not only lays down and prescribes what the laws are for a community, but also is there to support, take care of a community. So this is the way in which we see God, as both a judge as well as a protector. So that's the first. Zichronot, you hear the word zikaron in there, and you know that yizkor means to remember. And so Zichronot, the blasts that we sound for Zichronot, are the way in which we remember all of those amazing signs and miracles that were created for us as the Jewish people. And then finally, the third one is shofarot, which is the plural word for shofar, which means the actual blasts and the awakening. So this also is twofold, one of which is that not only are we to listen to the sound of the shofar as a wake-up call to look at our lives and begin that process of um, examination and teshuvah, but also as a kind of a wake-up call to God to not forget about us, to remember the covenant, to be there for us, and to continue to be our partners in this ongoing care of the world, care of humanity, and so on. So those were the three parts of the shofar service. Each of those is preceded by special verses from scripture and 10 different verses for each of those, and then the blowing of the shofar. So now I'm going to speak specifically about the physical shofar itself, as well as the history. And I'm going to try to get this all in a brief period of time, although it's a lot of information. So you'll have to bear with me. And if something kind of oozes over to the next session of Hi There with Rabbi Leah, you'll have to forgive me, but hopefully this will be interesting. So, as you know, the shofar is blown in the synagogue during services on Rosh Hashanah and then at the very end of Yom Kippur. And it is also blown every weekday morning during the month of Elul. And we are now in the month of Elul, which is the last month of the Hebrew calendar before we get into we have two ways in which we count the Hebrew calendar, but it is the month that precedes the high holidays. Let's put it that way. And of course, Rosh Hashanah is the birthday of the world. So it's like a new year because just as your birthday begins a new year of your life, so too does Rosh Hashanah, which is the world's birthday, begin a new year for the world. Very strange calculations in the Hebrew calendar that would take a lifetime to learn. So I'm just trying to impart some information that I hope will be of interest to you. Okay. The shofar is mentioned very frequently in the Torah, in the Hebrew Bible, not just the Torah, but the entire Bible. In the second section, which is Nevi'im, which is the prophets, also in the third section, which is the Ketuvim, all the different writings. It's mentioned in the Talmud and it's mentioned in rabbinic literature. The shofar was used as an ancient Near Eastern method of communication because without telephones, cell phones, fax machines, scanners, and all the other amazing technology that we have nowadays, somehow information had to reach from one community to another. And the best way to do that was through sound because sound carries. And especially when you don't live in a time when there's lots of high buildings and structures that are going to block the sound from coming, the sound would carry. So it was used to mark new moons and also the Jubilee year. The Jubilee year is the 50th year of the counting of 7 years of seven times. Does that make any sense? So we spoke at one point about what's called the Shemitah year. And the Hebrew calendar is divided into a cycle that goes every 7 years. So that for 6 years, we are allowed to plant and harvest as we see fit. This is pertaining, of course, to the ancient land of Israel. And then in the 7th year, it's a Shemitah year, which is the year in which the fields are to lie fallow. And there are all sorts of agricultural laws that dictate what may and what may not be harvested, what may and may not be planted, what part of the fields has to be reserved for those who are poor, who come to collect for themselves, and so on. But it was a way in which honor was shown to the land and a recognition that the land did not belong to human beings, that the land was God's, and that just as humans and animals and slaves and everybody else rests on Shabbat, so too does the earth have a Shabbat every 7th year. So when we have 7 times 7, that's 49 years. In the 50th year is a special year known as the Yovel or the Jubilee. And indeed, when somebody has a 50th wedding anniversary, that is their Jubilee year. So we announce the Jubilee with the blast of the shofar, and also on the first of Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashanah. And again, I mentioned that this year Rosh Hashanah is on a Shabbat, which does not permit the shofar to be blown. So we'll talk about that. It was also used as the method by which the start of a war was announced. If you're trying to get the attention of troops that are situated all throughout the land, the best way to do that is to blow the shofar. And it wasn't just blown in Jerusalem and that was it. It was blown from, Israel has 7 hills. It was blown from the hilltops. It would then be heard in distant communities. It would be blown there until eventually word got out throughout the country. That there are also trumpets that are mentioned in the Torah, but that is not the shofar. That is a completely different instrument, and in fact has a different name, which is chatzos ra. Chatzos ra is a trumpet, so we know that is a different kind of an instrument from a shofar, not made out of a ram's horn, but made out of some sort of metal or other material. So the in the temple in Jerusalem, sometimes the shofar was actually used in combination with the trumpet. And as I mentioned, on the Jubilee year, on Yom Kippur, there's a ceremony that's performed with the shofar to indicate the Jubilee year. And the rabbis created the practice of sounding the shofar every Yom Kippur. It used to be just on the Yom Kippur of the Jubilee year, and then the rabbis adopted it to blow the shofar not just on the Jubilee year, but on every Yom Kippur. So that last blast is almost the end of the Yom Kippur service. In the afternoon at Ne'ilah, we do the Yizkor service, the Ne'ilah service. There's a blast of the shofar, and then Havdalah to separate the holy day from the rest of the week. And so on the regular days, on all special days when the shofar is sounded, there are different kinds of blasts that are done than on Rosh Hashanah. So this is a whole this is a whole subject that is very, very involved and very intense, and you have to be an expert in this to know when it is blown, how it is blown, why it is blown, and so on and so forth. The shofar was blown in the times of Joshua to help them capture Jericho. We read that in Joshua. And as they surrounded the walls, as the story goes, the shofar was blown. The walls of the city came tumbling down, and the Jews were able to capture the city. Shofar was commonly taken out to war with the troops so that they would know when a battle would begin, and perhaps when the battle was over and it was time to possibly retreat. So this was in biblical times. In post-biblical times, the shofar best became known for being used on Rosh Hashanah. But there are some other ritual uses. And in Talmudic times, which is from about the 1st century to about the 14th century, it was also blown to introduce Shabbat. So the Shabbat was witnessed, so to speak, by 2 witnesses. When they saw a certain number of stars in the sky, the shofar would then be blown, and that sound would then disperse to other parts of Israel, and folks would know that it was officially Shabbat. It was also used as a sign of mourning for the destruction of the temples in Jerusalem, because let's face it, the shofar has somewhat of a mournful sound as well. It's generally not used anymore for secular purposes, except in some notable cases, which I'll tell you about in a moment. Jewish law, halakha, says that Rosh Hashanah shofar blasts may not be sounded on Shabbat. Now, you might be wondering why that is. And it's kind of an interesting thing. So you may take a few guesses, like shofar can't be blown on Shabbat because it's a musical instrument and we don't play musical instruments on Shabbat. It can't be blown on Rosh Hashanah on Shabbat because it disturbs the sensibility of the day, which is supposed to be restful and quiet. And the shofar can sound a little more shrill or can be disruptive. And those are all good reasons, but it's not the reason. And the reason is that the person who blows the shofar, who's known as the Ba'alei Tikiyah, meaning the shofar sounder. Ba'alei, the word Baal of Ba'alei means the Lord, or the blower of the shofar, just like somebody who reads Torah is known as Ba'alei or Ba'alat Kriyah. The Ba'alei shofar, the person that blows the shofar, may be tempted to carry the shofar from one place to another. So let's say he was practicing the shofar in his home and left it there, and now it's Shabbat morning and he's got to get it over to the synagogue. Well, you're not allowed to carry on Shabbat. So unless you left it there the week before, what are you going to do? So the minhag, the custom, actually more than a custom, the law in the Talmud says you may not blow the shofar because it may cause the shofar blower to commit a transgression of Shabbat, which is carrying the shofar. So this year on Shabbat morning, we will not be blowing the shofar, but again, you will hear it on Yom Kippur, and you'll hear me blow it during the weekdays that I am on campus. Okay. After the destruction of the temples, the sounding of the shofar on Shabbat was restricted to the place where the Sanhedrin was located. So when the Sanhedrin ceased to exist, the sounding of the shofar was discontinued as well. But on Rosh Hashanah, if it should fall on Shabbat, the shofar is not blown. So what is the mitzvah? Because it is a mitzvah. The blessing that we say is the long blessing, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Kidshanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu. And that formulaic opening is the blessing prior to a commandment. And in the English, the translation is, Blessed are you, our sovereign God, ruler of the world, who sanctifies us with your commandments and commands us to. Now that's different, for example, from the blessing for Motzi, which is simply Baruch Ata Adonai Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz. We don't have that whole part that says Asher Kidshanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu, who has sanctified us by your commandments and commanded us to. So the commandment surrounding the shofar is not the blowing of the shofar, but the hearing of the shofar. So if you don't blow it yourself, or you don't know how to blow a shofar, or you've never tried, you may want to. But the mitzvah is actually hearing the shofar blown. And it's very interesting to know when a person has or has not fulfilled the mitzvah. So, for example, if you are walking down the street and you hear the shofar blown, you have not fulfilled the mitzvah because you have not necessarily had the intention of stopping and listening to the blowing and fulfilling the mitzvah. So it can't just be kind of an accidental hearing of the shofar being blown. It has to be an intentional, concerted involvement in the mitzvah itself. So, for example, if a shofar is blown in a pit or in a cave, not that I know of anybody who's ever blown a shofar in a cave, but it probably would sound very cool. The mitzvah is only fulfilled if you are there with the shofar blower and you hear the shofar being blown. But if you are miles away and you hear the echo, you have not fulfilled the mitzvah of hearing the shofar. Interesting, huh? Maybe a little wacky, but interesting too. Also, hearing the shofar on a radio or on the internet or a recording, that is not valid to satisfy the mitzvah either, because you have an electronically reproduced sound is not the same as hearing the natural sound produced by the shofar itself. So you got to hear the natural sound. Like so many other mitzvot, hearing the shofar is not a mitzvah that is incumbent upon women and minors, a minor being a child under the age of 13, and specifically a boy under the age of 13. And according to the Talmud, women are exempt from time-bound mitzvot. So anything that has to be done at a specific time of the day, women are exempt from. The rationale being that women should not have to drop what they're doing to be bound up by something that is timely. So, for example, women are exempt from the mitzvah of wearing tefillin because that has to be done at a certain time of day. However, that doesn't say that women shouldn't hear the shofar being blown, and in fact, should hear the shofar being blown, and encouraged to attend that ceremony that welcomes in the month of of Elul, and also is blown during the Rosh Hashanah ceremonies. The woman doesn't have to be at home preparing all the holiday meals. She may not be obligated, but she certainly is not precluded from hearing the shofar being blown. Let me put it in a politically correct manner. So I talked briefly about intention, and when the Baal Tekiah, the shofar sounder, blows the shofar with intention, it is done in a way where the one blowing the shofar intends for those who hear it to fulfill the mitzvah. So remember I said if you're just happening to be walking in a forest and you hear a shofar being blown, if you don't have the intention to be fulfilling the mitzvah, you have not fulfilled the mitzvah. However, if somebody is blowing the shofar in a public square and someone passing by stops and listens and intends to hear it, then it is considered fulfilling the mitzvah. So if the listener stands still, it is presumed that he or she intends to hear it and is fulfilling the mitzvah. But if one hears the blast and doesn't have the intention of fulfilling the mitzvah, then the mitzvah is not fulfilled. I accidentally heard the shofar being blown. I really didn't have any intention. I really wasn't concentrating or focusing on it. That individual has not yet fulfilled the mitzvah. The person who blasts the shofar, the Baalei or the Baalei Tekiah, is known as the master of the blast, or the mistress of the blast, I guess. And being a Baalei or Baalat Tekiah is a great honor. Traditionally, it's only a male adult Jew who is eligible to do this, as long as he is acceptable to the congregation. So it is considered an honor. And the person who blows the shofar on Rosh Hashanah should be somebody learned in Torah, has to be somebody who is God-fearing. And the Shulchan Aruch, which is a compilation of Jewish law, mitzvot, discusses who is fit to blow the shofar on behalf of a congregation. And, they have to be an upright person with integrity and knowledge and so on. And a woman may intone the shofar, according to halacha, for herself and other women, and she may say the blessing, but women are not, again, commanded in the mitzvah and may not blow the shofar on behalf of the men. So again, what I'm telling you is halakha, Jewish law. It is not the way in which progressive Jews practice this this beautiful ritual. Okay, so now we talk about the choice of an animal, which is the hardest part for me as somebody who doesn't eat animals and has to put her mouth on a ram's horn. But a shofar can be made actually from the horn of any animal from the bovide family. So cows are bovide, except you cannot make it from a cow. All right. So the bovide family are animals that have cloven hooves. They've got the slit in the hoof and chew their cud, which means they chew their food. It goes down into one stomach. It comes up. They chew it again. It goes down into another stomach. It comes up and so on. Lovely, huh? I hope you're not eating breakfast while you're watching this. In any event, those that describes a whole genre of animals, a whole species, I guess one would say, except the cow is not permitted. And the material of the horn, the outer layer, is made of keratin, which is the same thing that your hair and your nails are made out of. And it's got a layer of cartilage, which can be removed to make the horn hollow. An antler, though, is different because it is a solid bone and it cannot be made hollow. So antlers, by the way, fall off and regrow and fall off and regrow, as you know. Horns do not. A horn is a permanent fixture on an animal that does not molt. There's no requirement that the animal used for a shofar is ritually slaughtered, shrita, which is kind of interesting because the mitzvah is for hearing the shofar and not eating the animal from which it comes. Now, I would suppose that if the animal is going to be eaten, then it does have to be slaughtered ritually. But if it's just for purposes of the horn, which makes me very sad, that object doesn't have inherent holiness. It's what we give it through the bracha, through the commandment, that makes it holy. So the animal does not have to be killed in a kosher manner. And the horn is always inedible, so we're not making a bracha over something that we're going to eat. It's considered what they call mere dust and not an unkosher substance because it's something that one wouldn't eat anyway. That's like saying, that an inanimate object has to have a bracha over it if you're not, a bracha for eating if you're not going to eat it, or that it has to be slaughtered or in a certain way. So I think I'm going to leave it there for today. We'll take this up again next week, and then I'll finish up on the shofar, and we'll also begin to talk about Rosh Hashanah, and then Yom Kippur, and then the holidays will be here. So, wow. This is going to take our time between now and then. I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you so much for joining me for Hi There with Rabbi Leah. And I'll see you on campus this week. Lihitraot. Bye bye.